Sarah Chen walked through the corridors of the Galactic Academy with her head held high, though her stomach churned with nervous energy. The massive space station housed students from dozens of different species, all here to learn about interstellar diplomacy and xenobiology. As one of only 3 humans in her year, Sarah had grown accustomed to the stares and whispers that followed her wherever she went. The other species found humans fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. Stories of human resilience, stubbornness, and what the galaxy politely called creative problem-solving had spread far beyond Earth's borders. Some tales were exaggerated, others were completely fabricated, but enough were true that most aliens gave humans a wide berth. Sarah's xenobiology class was her favorite, taught by Professor Vextar, a tall, graceful being from the Zephyrian Empire. His crystalline skin caught the artificial light as he moved, casting rainbow patterns across the classroom walls. Today felt different, though. The usual pre-class chatter was more excited, more electric than normal. "Students, please take your seats," Professor Vextar announced, his voice carrying the musical quality common to his species. "Today we have a very special demonstration that will help you understand the concept of apex predators across different worlds." Sarah noticed several of her classmates glancing in her direction with what looked like anticipation. Crix, a 6-armed Malarian sitting nearby, chittered softly to his friend. "I heard they're bringing something that even scares the humans," he whispered, thinking Sarah couldn't hear him. The professor touched a control panel, and the classroom's main screen flickered to life. "Before we begin, I want you all to understand that what you're about to see is perfectly safe. The creature we've brought today is contained within the most advanced containment field our technology can provide." A massive cargo container was wheeled into the classroom by 2 security guards wearing full environmental suits. The container itself was nearly 3 meters tall and just as wide, made of some dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Warning symbols in multiple languages covered its surface, and a low humming sound emanated from within. "This," Professor Vextar said with obvious pride, "is a shadow maw from the death world of Kithra Prime. They are considered one of the most dangerous predators in known space, capable of tearing through reinforced steel with their claws and possessing intelligence that rivals most sentient species." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but not from fear. Something about the container bothered her, though she couldn't put her finger on what it was exactly. The professor continued his lecture, explaining the creature's evolutionary adaptations and hunting strategies. The other students listened with rapt attention, some taking notes while others simply stared at the ominous container. Every few minutes, a scratching sound would come from within, followed by what sounded like a low growl. "Now," Professor Vextar said, "we're going to activate the viewing panel so you can observe the creature safely. Remember, the containment field is impenetrable. Even a human couldn't break through it." The comment was clearly meant as a joke, and several students laughed nervously. Sarah didn't find it funny. She was too focused on the sounds coming from the container. Something about them struck her as wrong. The front panel of the container became transparent, revealing the creature within. Gasps echoed through the classroom. The shadow maw was indeed fearsome to behold. It stood nearly 2.5 meters tall, covered in dark fur that seemed to shift and move on its own. Its eyes glowed with an eerie blue light, and its mouth was filled with teeth that looked capable of shearing through bone. But as Sarah watched, she noticed something the others seemed to miss. The creature's posture wasn't aggressive. Its ears were pressed flat against its head, and its tail was tucked between its legs. When it moved, it favored its left rear leg, and there were marks on its fur that looked suspiciously like restraint burns. The shadow maw suddenly pressed itself against the transparent panel, its glowing eyes scanning the classroom. When its gaze found Sarah, it stopped moving entirely. For a long moment, human and alien predator stared at each other through the barrier. Then something extraordinary happened. The creature's aggressive stance melted away entirely. Its ears perked up, its tail emerged from between its legs, and it pressed both massive paws against the viewing panel. From deep in its throat came a sound that wasn't a growl at all. It was whimpering. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. The creature wasn't trying to intimidate or threaten anyone. It was scared, hurt, and looking directly at her with what could only be described as pleading eyes. "Fascinating," Professor Vextar was saying to the class. "Notice how it's attempting to identify the weakest potential prey. The creature is clearly focusing on the human, probably recognizing her as the smallest and most vulnerable target. But Sarah knew better. She had grown up on a farm in rural Montana, surrounded by animals of all kinds. She had learned to read body language and emotional states in creatures that couldn't speak. This shadow maw wasn't sizing her up as prey. It was asking for help. The creature pressed harder against the panel, its whimpers becoming more audible. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly disturbed by the sounds. But Sarah leaned forward, studying every detail of the alien's condition. The burns on its fur were definitely from restraints. Its favoring of one leg suggested an untreated injury, and there was something else. Something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Around the creature's neck, barely visible beneath its thick fur, was a collar. Not a simple restraint, but something with lights and wires that pulsed in rhythm with the creature's heartbeat. "Professor?" Sarah said, raising her hand. "How exactly was this creature captured?" Professor Vexter paused in his lecture. "That's not really relevant to today's lesson. Miss Chen, the important thing is that we have the opportunity to observe such a magnificent predator up close." "But it is relevant," Sarah pressed, standing up from her seat. "Because unless I'm very much mistaken, this creature isn't just contained. It's being tortured." The classroom fell silent. Even the shadow maw stopped whimpering, its glowing eyes fixed on Sarah with what looked like hope. "That's quite an accusation," Professor Vextar said, his crystalline skin darkening with what Sarah had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of a frown. "The creature is simply being held for study. Any discomfort it might be experiencing is minimal and necessary for our research." Sarah looked back at the shadow maw, which had now pressed its entire body against the viewing panel. Its eyes never left hers, and she could see intelligence there. Not just animal cunning, but real, sentient awareness. The creature was trying to communicate with her, and Sarah was starting to understand exactly what it was trying to say. Sarah couldn't shake the image of those pleading blue eyes as she left the xenobiology classroom, while her classmates chattered excitedly about the terrifying predator they had just observed. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. The way the shadow maw had looked at her, the desperate hope in its posture, the obvious signs of abuse, it all pointed to something much darker than a simple academic demonstration. That evening, Sarah sat in her small dormitory room, staring at her personal computer screen. She had spent hours researching everything she could find about shadow maws and the planet Cathera Prime. What she discovered only made her more concerned. According to multiple xenobiological surveys, shadow maws were indeed apex predators, but they were also highly intelligent pack animals with complex social structures. They demonstrated tool use, problem-solving abilities, and what appeared to be rudimentary language skills. Several research papers suggested they might even qualify for protection under the Galactic Sentience Accords, though no formal classification had ever been made. More disturbing were the reports she found about illegal creature trafficking. Apparently, there was a thriving black market for exotic predators, often used in underground fighting rings or as status symbols for wealthy collectors. The methods used to capture and control these creatures were often brutal, involving pain compliance devices and psychological conditioning. Sarah thought about the collar she had glimpsed around the shadow maw's neck, the way it had flinched when Professor Vextar approached the container, and how it had only shown calm behavior when looking at her. Everything pointed to a creature that had been traumatized and was reaching out to the one being in the room it somehow identified as safe. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the xenobiology lab early. She had convinced herself that she needed to see the creature again, to confirm what she thought she had observed. The lab was empty except for a single maintenance worker, a friendly Drakmarian named Gorth who had always been kind to the human students. "Morning." "Sarah," Gorth rumbled, his rocky hide glistening under the lab lights. "You're here early. The next class isn't for several hours." "I know," Sarah replied, glancing toward the storage area where she assumed the shadow maw's container was being kept. "I was hoping to get another look at the creature from yesterday. For my research project." Gorth's expression grew troubled. "Ah, that poor thing. I've been maintaining these labs for 15 years and I've never seen a creature in such distress. It barely slept last night, kept making these sounds that, well, they reminded me of my own pups when they were frightened." Sarah's heart clenched. "What kind of sounds?" "Whimpering mostly, and it keeps scratching at something around its neck. I wanted to report it to the Animal Welfare Committee, but Professor Vextar insisted everything was normal." Gorth looked around nervously, then leaned closer to Sarah. Between you and me, I don't think that collar it's wearing is just for identification. I've seen pain compliance devices before, and that looks exactly like one. Pain compliance? Sarah asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. They use electrical impulses to condition behavior. Completely banned for use on sentient species, but since shadow maws aren't officially classified as sentient, Gorth shrugged helplessly. It's technically legal, though morally questionable. Sarah felt her anger rising. The idea of any creature being subjected to electrical torture was appalling, but the thought that it might be happening to an intelligent being made her furious. Can you show me where it's being kept? Gorth hesitated. I could get in trouble for this. Please, Sarah said. I just need to see it again. I think it was trying to communicate with me yesterday. After a moment, Gorth nodded and led her to a secure storage room behind the main lab. The Shadow Maw's container sat in the center, still humming with containment field energy. Sarah approached slowly, her footsteps echoing in the quiet space. As soon as she came into view, the creature perked up. Its ears lifted, its tail began to wag slightly, and it pressed against the viewing panel with obvious excitement. When it saw her, it made a sound that was unmistakably welcoming. A low, rumbling noise that reminded Sarah of a cat's purr mixed with a dog's whine. Hello there, Sarah said softly, pressing her hand against the outside of the panel. The Shadow Maw immediately placed its massive paw against the same spot, separated only by the transparent barrier and the energy field. That's when Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The collar around the creature's neck was pulsing with a steady red light, and every few seconds the Shadow Maw would wince, and its muscles would tense. The device was delivering regular pain impulses, even when the creature was being completely docile. Oh, you poor thing, Sarah whispered. They're hurting you just to keep you afraid. The Shadow Maw seemed to understand her tone, if not her words. It whimpered softly and touched the collar with one clawed hand, then looked back at her with those intelligent blue eyes. The message was clear. Help me, Sarah, Gorth said quietly from behind her. What you're thinking of doing, whatever it is, it's not possible. The containment field requires 3 different authorization codes to deactivate, and the collar probably has its own security measures. There has to be something we can do, Sarah replied, not taking her eyes off the creature. This is torture, Gorth. This creature is intelligent, it's suffering, and it's asking for help. Even if we could free it, where would it go? This is a space station. There's nowhere for a Shadow Maw to run, and the security forces would just recapture it anyway. Sarah knew Gorth was right, but she couldn't just walk away. The creature was still watching her, still hoping for salvation that she couldn't provide. As she stood there struggling with her helplessness, an idea began to form. Gorth, she said slowly, what if we didn't need to free it physically? What if we could prove that it's being illegally tortured? Get the authorities involved? You'd need evidence of sentience, Gorth replied. And not just intelligence, true sentience. The kind that qualifies for protection under galactic law. Sarah looked back at the Shadow Maw, which tilted its head as if listening to their conversation. She had an idea, but it was risky and would require the creature's cooperation. Can you give me a few minutes alone with it? She asked. Gorth looked uncertain. I don't know if that's wise. Even contained, it's still dangerous, please. I think I know how to prove what we need to prove. After a moment of internal debate, Gorth nodded. 5 minutes. Then I have to get back to my duties before someone notices I'm gone. As Gorth left the room, Sarah turned her full attention to the Shadow Maw. The creature was watching her intently, its head tilted in a distinctly curious posture. Okay, Sarah said quietly. If you really are as smart as I think you are, then you understand that we need to prove it to help you. Can you show me that you're not just an animal? Can you show me that you're a person? The Shadow Maw stared at her for a long moment, then slowly raised one massive paw. With deliberate precision, it extended a single claw and began to scratch something into the metal floor of its container. Sarah watched in amazement as symbols began to appear. Not random scratches, but carefully formed marks that looked almost like writing. When the creature finished, it looked back at Sarah expectantly. The symbols formed a clear pattern, 3 groups of marks, each group containing the same number of scratches as there were moons visible through the lab's viewport. The Shadow Maw wasn't just intelligent, it was demonstrating mathematical understanding, observational skills, and symbolic communication. It was proving its sentience. Sarah's hands trembled as she activated her personal recorder, making sure to capture clear images of the symbols the shadow maw had scratched into the floor. This was evidence of mathematical reasoning and symbolic communication, proof that the creature possessed the cognitive abilities that qualified for sentience protection under galactic law. But even as excitement filled her chest, Sarah knew that proving sentience was only the first step. She needed to document the torture device around the creature's neck and somehow get this evidence to the right authorities without alerting Professor Vextar or whoever was really behind this illegal operation. The shadow maw watched her work, its blue eyes tracking her movements with obvious intelligence. When Sarah finished recording, the creature made another soft rumbling sound and pointed to its collar with one clawed finger. The gesture was unmistakably deliberate. It wanted her to document the device that was causing it pain. "I see it," Sarah whispered, zooming in with her recorder to capture the collar's design. The device was more sophisticated than she had initially realized, with multiple components that looked like they served different functions. Pain compliance was probably just one of its capabilities. As she recorded, the collar pulsed with its regular red light, and the shadow maw's entire body tensed in response. Sarah could see the creature's jaw clench as it endured the electrical shock, but it remained perfectly still, as if it understood how important this documentation was. "You're being so brave," Sarah said softly. "I promise I'm going to help you." The creature's ears perked up at her words, and it made a sound that was almost like a word. Not in any language Sarah recognized, but the intonation was clearly communicative. The shadow maw was trying to speak to her. Gorth returned just as Sarah was finishing her documentation. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "More than I hoped for," Sarah replied, showing him the images on her recorder. "Look at these symbols. This creature is demonstrating mathematical understanding and symbolic communication. It's trying to talk to me, Gorth. This isn't just an animal. It's a person." Gorth studied the images, his rocky features growing increasingly troubled. "This is serious, Sarah. If this creature really is sentient, then what's being done to it isn't just animal cruelty. It's torture of a sapient being. That's a crime against the Galactic Accords." "Who do we report this to?" Sarah asked. "And how do we do it without tipping off whoever is responsible?" "The Galactic Ethics Committee has a confidential reporting system," Gorth replied. "But they'll want more than just images. They'll need testimony from qualified xenobiologists, psychological evaluations, maybe even communication attempts." Sarah looked back at the shadow maw, which was still watching their conversation with obvious interest. "What if we could arrange for an independent evaluation? Someone who isn't connected to the Academy. That would require getting the creature away from Professor Vextar's control, at least temporarily, and I don't see how we could manage that without arousing suspicion." As they talked, Sarah noticed something that made her pulse quicken. The shadow maw had moved to the back corner of its container and was making soft clicking sounds while manipulating something with its claws. At first, Sarah thought it was just fidgeting, but then she realized what it was actually doing. The creature was working on its collar. "Gorth," Sarah said urgently, "look at what it's doing." They both watched as the shadow maw used one claw like a precision tool, apparently probing some kind of access panel on the collar device. The creature worked with the focused concentration of an engineer, its movements careful and deliberate. "Impossible," Gorth breathed. "It's trying to disable the pain compliance device, but that would require understanding of advanced electronics." The shadow maw paused in its work and looked directly at Sarah. It made a questioning sound, then gestured toward the container's control panel. The meaning was clear. It wanted her to try to help from the outside. "It knows we can't deactivate the containment field," Sarah realized. "But it's asking if we can interfere with the collar's signal somehow." Gorth was already shaking his head. "The collar operates on a closed system. Even if we could access the container's electronics, interfering with a pain compliance device could trigger a full power discharge. It could kill the creature." But Sarah was studying the container's control interface, her mind racing. She had grown up around farm equipment and had learned basic electronics out of necessity. The container's systems were alien in design, but the principles were universal. "What if we didn't interfere with the collar directly?" she asked. What if we created some kind of electromagnetic interference? Something that might disrupt its timing or reduce its power output. That's incredibly dangerous, Gorth warned. And probably illegal. We could both be expelled from the academy. Sarah looked back at the shadow maw, which was still working patiently on its collar despite the regular shocks it was receiving. The creature's determination and intelligence were undeniable, and its suffering was obvious. How could she walk away from someone who was asking for her help? Gorth, she said quietly, if this was one of your people being tortured, what would you do? The maintenance worker was silent for a long moment, his rocky features showing the internal struggle he was experiencing. Finally, he sighed heavily. There's an emergency maintenance protocol that requires testing all electromagnetic systems once per shift. If I happened to run that test while you were here documenting the creature's behavior, any interference would look like an accident, Sarah finished. A very brief accident, maybe 10 or 15 seconds at most. And if anyone asks, you were just observing for your research project. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. Do it. Gorth moved to a secondary control panel while Sarah positioned herself, where she could observe both the shadow maw and the container's monitoring systems. The creature seemed to sense that something was about to happen, because it stopped working on its collar and pressed against the viewing panel, its eyes locked on Sarah's. Initiating electromagnetic systems test, Gorth announced, his voice professionally neutral, in case anyone was monitoring the lab's audio systems. The moment Gorth activated the test sequence, every electronic system in the room flickered. The container's humming changed pitch, and the shadow maw's collar suddenly went dark. For exactly 14 seconds, the pain compliance device was completely inactive. The shadow maw moved with incredible speed and precision. Its claws flew over the collar's access panel, manipulating components with the skill of someone who understood exactly what they were doing. When the electromagnetic interference ended, and the systems came back online, the collar's red light resumed its pulsing, but something had changed. Instead of the regular painful pulses it had been delivering before, the light now flickered erratically. The shadow maw's posture relaxed noticeably, and when the next pulse came, the creature barely reacted to it. It actually did it. Gorth whispered in amazement. It reduced the collar's power output. How could it possibly know advanced electronics? Sarah was staring at the shadow maw with a mixture of awe and growing realization. What if we've been looking at this all wrong? What if shadow maws aren't just intelligent animals? What if they're a technological species? The creature seemed to understand her words because it moved back to the scratched symbols on the floor and added something new. This time the markings looked less like mathematical notation and more like a schematic diagram. It was showing her the collar's internal structure. We need to get this information to the ethics committee immediately, Sarah said. This isn't just sentience. This is evidence of advanced technical knowledge. We're looking at a member of a sapient technological species being illegally held and tortured. But even as she spoke, Sarah heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Someone was coming to the lab, and they needed to get out of the storage room before they were discovered with the evidence that could expose everything. Sarah quickly shut off her recorder and slipped it into her pocket as the footsteps grew closer. Gorth was already moving toward the storage room's exit, gesturing for her to follow. The shadow maw seemed to understand the urgency of the situation, because it moved away from the viewing panel and curled up in what looked like a sleeping position, though its alert ears suggested it was very much awake and listening. They made it out of the storage room just as Professor Vextar entered the main lab, accompanied by two beings Sarah didn't recognize. One was a tall, thin creature with gray skin and large black eyes, a member of the Kepler Collective. The other was shorter and broader, wearing expensive clothing that marked him as someone of importance. Miss Chen, Professor Vextar said, his crystalline skin shifting to a deeper blue that Sarah had learned indicated displeasure. What brings you to the lab so early? I was hoping to review some of yesterday's material for my research project, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Gorth was kind enough to let me use the observation equipment. The unknown beings exchanged glances, and Sarah caught something in their expressions that made her skin crawl. These weren't academics or researchers. There was something predatory about the way they looked at her, as if she was a problem that might need to be solved. I'm afraid the lab is closed for maintenance today, Professor Vextar said smoothly. Perhaps you could return tomorrow? Of course, Sarah replied, moving toward the exit. I'll just gather my things. As she pretended to collect materials from one of the workstations, Sarah strained to hear the conversation happening behind her. The three beings had moved closer to each other and were speaking in low voices, but her enhanced human hearing allowed her to catch fragments of their discussion. Specimen is becoming problematic, the Kepler Collective member was saying. Modifications to the control device, came the reply from the expensively dressed being. Accelerate the timeline, Professor, Vextar added. Sarah felt her blood run cold. They were talking about the Shadow Maw, and whatever they had planned for the creature, it was going to happen soon. She needed to get her evidence to the authorities immediately. Have a productive day, Miss Chen, Professor Vextar called as she headed for the exit. Thank you, Professor, Sarah replied, fighting the urge to run. Once she was safely away from the lab, Sarah made her way to her dormitory as quickly as possible without attracting attention. Her hands shook as she uploaded the images and recordings to her personal computer and began preparing a formal report for the Galactic Ethics Committee. The evidence was compelling, but she knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. She needed corroborating testimony from someone with credentials, someone who could speak with authority about xenobiology and sentience determination. Unfortunately, most of the qualified faculty at the Academy seemed to be either involved in whatever was happening to the Shadow Maw or unwilling to challenge Professor Vextar's authority. Sarah was still wrestling with this problem when her door chimed, indicating a visitor. She opened it to find Dr. Elena Martinez, one of the other human students at the Academy. Elena was in her final year of xenopsychology studies and had always been friendly to Sarah, though they hadn't spoken much recently. Sarah, Elena said urgently, we need to talk. Can I come in? Of course, Sarah replied, stepping aside to let her enter. Elena looked around the small room nervously before speaking. I heard you were asking questions about the creature in Professor Vextar's demonstration yesterday. Is that true? Sarah hesitated. She didn't know how much she could trust Elena, but the other woman's obvious distress suggested she might be an ally rather than a threat. Why do you ask? Sarah said carefully. Because I've been researching shadow maws for my thesis on interspecies communication, Elena replied, and everything I've learned suggests they're not just intelligent. They're a fully sapient species with their own language, culture, and technology. Sarah felt a surge of hope. You have proof of this? Academic papers, ethnographic studies, even some linguistic analysis of their vocalizations. The problem is that most of this research has been suppressed or discredited. There are powerful interests that benefit from keeping shadow maws classified as non-sapient. What kind of interests? Elena's expression grew grim. The kind that make enormous profits from exotic creature trafficking. If shadow maws were officially recognized as sapient, it would shut down a multi-billion credit industry overnight. Sarah made a decision. She activated her computer and showed Elena the recording she had made that morning. Then you need to see this. Elena watched the footage in silence, her face growing pale as she saw the evidence of the creature's mathematical reasoning, symbolic communication, and technical knowledge. When the recording showed the shadow maw working on its collar, she gasped audibly. This is incredible, Elena breathed. This single recording contains more proof of shadow maw sapience than years of previous research. Where did you get this? I documented it myself this morning, Sarah replied. The creature was trying to communicate with me, trying to show me that it was intelligent and asking for help. Sarah, this is extremely dangerous. If the people behind this trafficking operation realize what you've discovered, Elena trailed off, but the implication was clear. Then we need to get this evidence to the authorities before they can stop us, Sarah said firmly. Do you know anyone at the ethics committee who would take this seriously? Elena nodded slowly. Dr. Keshvarthon, the committee's chief xenopsychologist. She's incorruptible and has been trying to expand sapience protections for years. But getting this evidence to her without alerting the wrong people won't be easy. What do you suggest? There's a conference on interspecies rights happening on Diplomatic Station 7 next week. Dr. Thon will be there, along with representatives from most of the major galactic powers. If we could present this evidence publicly, in front of witnesses from multiple governments. They couldn't suppress it or make it disappear, Sarah finished. But how do we get there? And how do we keep the creature safe until then? Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking. I might have an idea, but it's risky. My thesis advisor, Dr. Ross, is presenting a paper at the conference. If I could convince him to add our findings to his presentation, would he do that? Dr. Ross is a good man and he cares about justice. If I show him this evidence, I think he'll help us. The question is whether we can keep the Shadow Maw alive and safe until the conference. Sarah thought about the conversation she had overheard in the lab, about accelerating timelines and modifications to the control device. I don't think we have until next week. They're planning something soon. Then we need to move fast, Elena said, already reaching for her communicator. I'm going to contact Dr. Ross right now and arrange an emergency meeting. You need to document everything you can about the creature's condition and treatment. As Elena made her call, Sarah felt a mixture of hope and fear. They finally had a plan and an ally, but she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Somewhere in the Academy's labs, an intelligent being was suffering and asking for help, trusting her to find a way to save them. She just hoped she wouldn't let them down. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Ross, a distinguished man in his 60s with graying hair and kind eyes, listened to their evidence with growing outrage. His expertise in interspecies communication made him immediately recognize the significance of what Sarah had recorded. This is absolutely conclusive, he said after reviewing all the materials. Mathematical reasoning, symbolic communication, technical problem solving. This creature demonstrates every cognitive marker we use to identify sapient species. The fact that it's being subjected to pain compliance torture is a clear violation of galactic law. Can you help us get this to the ethics committee? Sarah asked. Better than that, Dr. Ross replied. I'm going to make some calls and see if we can arrange an emergency session. This evidence is too important to wait for a conference. But even as he spoke, Sarah's communicator chimed with an urgent message. It was from Gorth. They moved the creature. Emergency transport arrived an hour ago. Container is gone. Sarah stared at Gorth's message, her heart sinking. They had been too late. Somewhere in space, the Shadow Maw was being transported to an unknown destination, probably to face whatever fate its captors had planned. What is it? Dr. Ross asked, noticing her expression. They moved the creature, Sarah said, showing him the message. It's gone, Elena cursed softly in Spanish. They must have suspected something when they found you in the lab this morning. This proves there's a conspiracy and they're covering their tracks. Dr. Ross stood up and began pacing, his mind clearly working through the implications. This actually changes our strategy for the better, he said finally. Moving the creature was a mistake on their part. It proves consciousness of guilt and suggests they're operating outside proper channels. How does that help the Shadow Maw? Sarah asked, frustrated. We don't even know where they took it, but we can find out, Dr. Ross replied. Emergency transport authorizations have to be logged with station control. And more importantly, any movement of exotic creatures requires customs declarations and health certificates. There will be a paper trail. Elena was already activating her computer. I can access the Academy's transportation database. If they used official channels, the records will be there. As Elena worked, Dr. Ross continued his analysis. The fact that they moved so quickly suggests they're planning something imminent. Probably a sale or transfer to a private collector. We need to work on the assumption that we have very little time. Found it, Elena announced. Emergency transport authorization filed at 0847 hours this morning. Destination listed as Research Station Omega-7 in the neutral zone. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The neutral zone? That's outside galactic jurisdiction. Once they get the creature there, it disappears into the black market, Dr. Ross finished grimly. Research Station Omega-7 is notorious for hosting illegal activities. It's technically a scientific facility, but everyone knows it's really a front for exotic creature trafficking and underground fighting rings. How long until the transport arrives there? Sarah asked. Elena checked the flight data. 18 hours, assuming they're using a standard cargo hauler. But Sarah, even if we could get the ethics committee to act immediately, they don't have enforcement authority in the neutral zone. Sarah refused to accept defeat. There has to be something we can do. That creature trusted me to help it. I can't just abandon it now. Dr. Ross was quiet for a moment, then made a decision that surprised both students. There might be a way, but it would require taking significant personal risks. I have contacts in the Galactic Defense Force, people who care more about justice than jurisdictional boundaries. Military intervention? Elena asked. Not officially, but there are GDF officers who have been trying to shut down the neutral zone trafficking operations for years. If we could provide them with concrete evidence and intelligence about a specific illegal shipment, they might be willing to conduct an unofficial rescue operation, Sarah finished, hope rising in her chest. Dr. Ross nodded. I'm thinking specifically of Captain Marcus Webb. He's human, like Sarah, and he has a reputation for creative interpretations of orders when it comes to protecting innocent beings. But he'll need more than just our recordings. He'll need proof that Research Station Omega-7 is violating galactic law. I might be able to help with that, Elena said slowly. My research into shadow maw trafficking led me to some underground networks. People who monitor the illegal creature trade and document violations. They might have intelligence about what's happening at Omega-7. Do it, Sarah said immediately. Contact everyone you can. We need to build an airtight case. As Elena began reaching out to her contacts, Dr. Ross activated his own communicator. I'm going to call Captain Webb. If anyone can mount a rescue operation in 18 hours, it's him. While her companions worked their networks, Sarah found herself staring at the images of the shadow maw on her computer screen. The creature's intelligent blue eyes seemed to look directly at her, and she could almost hear its pleading whimpers. The thought of it being sold to some collector or forced to fight in an arena made her sick. Sarah, Elena called out, pulling her from her dark thoughts. I've got something. My contact in the trafficking monitoring network says Research Station Omega-7 is hosting a major auction tomorrow. High-value exotic creatures, including several that are suspected to be sapient species. That confirms it, Dr. Ross said, looking up from his own communication. Captain Webb is interested, but he needs more than suspicion. He needs proof of illegal activity that he can use to justify intervention. Sarah thought about the conversation she had overheard in the lab, about accelerating timelines and modifications to the control device. What if we could prove they're planning to alter the creature somehow, to make it more suitable for whatever they're planning to sell it for? That would constitute torture and illegal modification of a potential sapient being, Dr. Ross said. Definitely grounds for intervention. But how do we prove it? We go to Research Station Omega-7, Sarah said simply. Elena stared at her. Sarah, that's insane. It's a criminal facility in the neutral zone. We can't just walk in there. We don't walk in, Sarah replied, her mind racing as a plan began to form. We register as buyers. The auction is tomorrow, right? That means they're accepting new participants today. Dr. Ross shook his head. Too dangerous. These aren't academic researchers. They're criminals who won't hesitate to kill anyone who threatens their operation. Then we don't threaten them, Sarah said. We play along until we can gather the evidence Captain Webb needs. Once we have proof of what they're doing to the shadow maw, the GDF can move in. With what money? Elena asked practically. Exotic creature auctions involve millions of credits. We'd need to prove we're legitimate buyers, Sarah smiled grimly. I have an idea about that too. Dr. Ross, what do you know about Marcus Industries? The Human Mining Corporation? They're one of the largest companies in Terran space. Why? Because Marcus Chen, the CEO, is my grandfather, and he's always told me that if I ever needed help, I should call him. Dr. Ross and Elena stared at her in shock. Your grandfather owns Marcus Industries? Elena asked. I don't advertise it, Sarah replied. I wanted to succeed at the academy on my own merits, but right now I need his resources. Marcus Industries has legitimate reasons to be interested in exotic biologics for their terraforming projects. We could pose as corporate representatives evaluating potential purchases. That might actually work, Dr. Ross said slowly. Marcus Industries has the financial backing to be credible buyers, and biological research for terraforming is a legitimate cover story. Sarah was already reaching for her communicator. I'm calling grandfather now. If anyone can arrange transportation to the neutral zone and establish credible corporate identities in 12 hours, it's him. As she placed the call, Sarah felt a mixture of determination and fear. She was about to drag her family's corporation into a dangerous rescue operation in lawless space, all to save a creature she had met for less than an hour. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw those intelligent blue eyes pleading for help. The Shadow Maw had trusted her. Now she had to prove worthy of that trust. The call connected, and her grandfather's familiar voice filled the room. "Sarah, what a pleasant surprise. How are your studies going?" "Grandfather, I need your help," Sarah said without preamble. "It's complicated and it's dangerous, but there's an intelligent being who will die if we don't act quickly." There was a pause. Then Marcus Chen's voice became serious and focused. "Tell me everything." As Sarah explained the situation, she knew she was about to find out if her grandfather's reputation for protecting the innocent extended beyond human space. The next few hours would determine whether they could save the Shadow Maw, or whether it would disappear forever into the galaxy's dark corners. Marcus Chen listened to his granddaughter's story without interruption, his sharp business mind processing every detail. When Sarah finished explaining about the Shadow Maw and Research Station Omega-7, there was a long silence on the communication link. "Grandfather?" Sarah asked nervously. "I'm here, little star," Marcus replied using his childhood nickname for her. "I'm just calculating what we'll need to pull this off. You're asking me to commit corporate espionage resources and risk significant assets for a creature trafficking rescue operation." Sarah's heart sank. "I know it sounds crazy, but it sounds like exactly the kind of thing your grandmother would have done," Marcus interrupted, and Sarah could hear the smile in his voice. She never could resist helping someone in need, no matter how dangerous it was. "Give me your contact information and stand by. I'll have a team to you within 6 hours." The relief Sarah felt was overwhelming. "Thank you, grandfather. I don't know how to." "You can thank me by staying alive long enough to complete this mission," Marcus replied seriously. "What you're describing isn't just creature trafficking. It's a major criminal operation with connections to legitimate academic institutions. People have died for interfering with less profitable enterprises." After ending the call, Sarah, Elena, and Dr. Ross spent the next several hours preparing for their undercover mission. Dr. Ross used his academic credentials to research everything available about Shadow Maw biology and potential commercial applications. Elena worked on creating believable cover identities and backstories for their roles as corporate representatives. Sarah studied the layout and operational procedures of Research Station Omega-7, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. True to his word, Marcus Chen's people arrived exactly 6 hours later. The team consisted of 4 individuals who moved with the quiet professionalism of former military personnel. Their leader introduced herself as Agent Torres, a compact woman with intelligent eyes and the kind of presence that commanded instant respect. "Mr. Chen briefed us on the situation," Torres said without preamble. "We've prepared everything you'll need for the mission, including corporate credentials, financial backing, and extraction protocols. But I want to be clear about the risks you're taking." She activated a holographic display showing Research Station Omega-7. This facility is essentially a fortress in space, protected by both automated defenses and hired security. The people who run it have killed to protect their operations, and they won't hesitate to do so again. If you're discovered, we may not be able to extract you. "What about GDF intervention?" Dr. Ross asked. "Captain Webb is positioning his ship at the edge of the neutral zone," Torres replied. "The moment you provide evidence of illegal activity involving sapient beings, he'll move in. But until then, you're on your own." Sarah studied the station's layout, noting the location of the auction facilities and detention areas. "How do we get close enough to the Shadow Maw to document its condition?" "The auction includes a preliminary viewing period where potential buyers can inspect the merchandise," Torres explained. "You'll have approximately 30 minutes of access to the creatures before the bidding begins." "That's your window." Elena looked pale but determined. "What about communication? How do we get the evidence to Captain Webb?" Torres handed each of them a small device that looked like a standard data pad. "These are specially modified. They'll record everything and automatically transmit to our ship via quantum entanglement communication. The transmission is instantaneous and can't be blocked or detected." Over the next few hours, Sarah found herself transformed into Sarah Marcus, a xenobiology specialist working for Marcus Industries' terraforming division. Her companions became Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a corporate consultant, and Dr. James Ross, the project's senior scientific advisor. Their mission was to evaluate exotic species for potential use in biological terraforming projects. The cover story was solid because it was largely true. Marcus Industries did conduct biological research for terraforming, and exotic species with unusual adaptations were genuinely valuable for such projects. The only difference was that they weren't actually planning to purchase anything. The journey to Research Station Omega-7 took 8 hours aboard a high-speed corporate transport. As they approached the station, Sarah got her first look at their destination through the ship's viewports. The facility was larger than she had expected, a sprawling complex of interconnected modules and docking bays that looked more like a small city than a research station. "Impressive, isn't it?" their pilot commented. "They've been expanding steadily for the past 5 years. Business must be good." Sarah felt sick thinking about what kind of business generated enough profit to fund such expansion. How many intelligent beings had suffered and died to build this place? The docking procedures were surprisingly professional and efficient. Station security conducted a thorough but routine inspection of their ship and credentials, clearly accustomed to wealthy buyers arriving for special events. Sarah's corporate identity passed without question, and within an hour they were being escorted through the station's corridors by a well-dressed representative. "Welcome to Research Station Omega-7, their guide said smoothly. "I'm Director Vance, and I'll be overseeing your visit today. I understand you're interested in specimens with unique biological adaptations." "That's correct," Dr. Ross replied, falling naturally into his role as the senior corporate representative. "Marcus Industries is always looking for species that might prove useful in extreme environment terraforming projects." "Excellent. We have several specimens that might interest you, including a particularly rare predator from Cathara Prime that demonstrates remarkable intelligence and adaptability." Sarah's pulse quickened. They were talking about the Shadow Maw. Director Vance led them through a series of corridors that gradually transitioned from the station's public areas to more restricted sections. The walls here were lined with containment cells, each one holding a different exotic creature. Sarah tried not to look too closely at the beings imprisoned behind the energy barriers, knowing that many of them were probably as intelligent and deserving of freedom as the Shadow Maw. "Here we are," Director Vance announced, stopping in front of a familiar-looking containment unit. "Our prize specimen, a fully mature Shadow Maw recently acquired and modified for optimal performance." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The creature behind the barrier was definitely the same Shadow Maw she had met at the academy, but something was terribly wrong. Its blue eyes, which had been bright and intelligent before, now seemed dull and unfocused. Its posture was different too. Instead of the alert, curious stance she remembered, it now stood with its head lowered and its shoulders slumped. "What kind of modifications have been made?" Lena asked, her voice carefully professional despite the horror Sarah could see in her eyes. "Behavioral conditioning, primarily," Director Vance replied proudly. "We've enhanced the pain compliance system and added neural inhibitors to reduce aggressive tendencies. The creature is now perfectly docile and will obey simple commands without resistance." Dr. Ross leaned closer to the containment field, studying the creature with apparent scientific interest. "Fascinating. May we observe it responding to commands?" "Of course," Director Vance said, activating a control device. "Shadow Maw, approach." The creature immediately moved to the front of the containment field, but its movements were mechanical and lifeless. This wasn't the intelligent, curious being that had tried to communicate with Sarah. This was something that had been broken and reprogrammed. "Impressive conditioning," Dr. Ross commented, while Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral. "How did you achieve such thorough behavioral modification?" "A combination of pain compliance and direct neural interface," Director Vance explained. "We can now control not just the creature's actions, but its emotional responses as well. It experiences only what we allow it to experience." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. They hadn't just captured and tortured the Shadow Maw, they had lobotomized it. The intelligent, hopeful being she had tried to help was gone, replaced by a living puppet. But as she watched, something flickered in the creature's dull eyes. For just a moment, a spark of the original intelligence seemed to surface, and its gaze found hers. The connection lasted only seconds before the neural inhibitors reasserted control. But it was enough. The real Shadow Maw was still in there, buried beneath layers of technological torture, but not completely destroyed. And if Sarah could see it, maybe the recording devices could capture it too. She just had to find a way to reach through the electronic prison and remind the creature who it really was. Sarah knew she had to act carefully. One wrong move would expose their mission and doom any chance of saving the Shadow Maw. But seeing the creature, in its current state, a shadow of its former, intelligent self, filled her with a cold fury that demanded action. The neural interface technology is quite impressive, she said to Director Vance, stepping closer to the containment field. Could you demonstrate the range of control you have over its responses? Certainly, Director Vance replied, clearly proud of his work. We can induce any emotional state, suppress cognitive functions, or enhance specific behaviors as needed. Watch this. He adjusted something on his control device, and the Shadow Maw's posture suddenly shifted to an aggressive stance. Its lips pulled back to reveal those dangerous teeth, and a low growl emanated from its throat. But there was something hollow about the display, like watching a puppet show rather than a real predator. And now, complete docility, Director Vance continued, making another adjustment. The creature immediately relaxed, its ears drooping and its tail tucking between its legs. The transformation was instant and unnatural, clearly the result of technological manipulation rather than genuine emotion. Remarkable, Dr. Ross commented, while secretly adjusting his recording device to capture everything. What safeguards are in place to prevent the neural interface from causing permanent damage? Director Vance shrugged dismissively. Some minor cognitive degradation is inevitable, but these creatures have redundant neural pathways. Even if we lose some intelligence, they retain enough function for our clients' needs. Sarah felt sick, but she forced herself to maintain her professional demeanor. May I ask what specific applications your clients have in mind for creatures with this level of control? Entertainment primarily, Director Vance replied. Fighting rings, private hunts, status displays. The neural interface allows us to guarantee specific behaviors regardless of the creature's natural instincts. Elena stepped forward, her xenopsychology training evident in her next question. What about the creature's capacity for communication? Do the modifications affect its ability to interact with handlers? Communication is suppressed to prevent complications, Director Vance explained. These creatures are surprisingly intelligent in their natural state, almost troublesomely so. The neural inhibitors eliminate that problem. As he spoke, Sarah noticed something that made her heart race. The Shadow Maw was watching their conversation with those dull eyes, but its claws were moving slightly against the floor of its containment cell. The movements were tiny, almost imperceptible, but Sarah recognized them immediately. The creature was scratching symbols into the floor, just as it had done at the academy. Despite the neural inhibitors, despite the pain compliance system, some part of its original intelligence was fighting through the technological torture and trying to communicate. Sarah needed to respond without alerting Director Vance to what was happening. She stepped slightly to one side, blocking his view of the creature's claws, and began tapping her finger against her leg in a simple pattern. 1 tap, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 taps. The Shadow Maw's ears twitched almost imperceptibly, and its claw movements shifted to match her pattern. The neural interface might be suppressing its higher cognitive functions, but the creature's deep intelligence was still there, still trying to reach out for help. I'd like to observe the creature's responses to different stimuli, Sarah said to Director Vance. Would it be possible to run some basic cognitive tests? I suppose that would be acceptable, Director Vance replied. What did you have in mind? Sarah pretended to consider the question while her mind raced. She needed to find a way to temporarily disrupt the neural interface system, to give the Shadow Maw a chance to demonstrate its true intelligence for the recording devices. Simple pattern recognition, perhaps, she suggested. Mathematical sequences, spatial relationships, that sort of thing. It would help us evaluate the creature's utility for complex terraforming tasks. As Director Vance prepared to activate some testing protocols, Sarah caught Elena's eye and made a subtle gesture toward the containment field's control systems. Elena nodded almost imperceptibly and began asking technical questions that drew Director Vance's attention away from the monitoring displays. While Elena kept him distracted, Sarah studied the containment field's interface. The system was sophisticated but followed standard design principles she recognized from her electronics background. More importantly, she could see where the neural interface controls were integrated with the containment field's power systems. Dr. Ross moved to position himself where he could observe both the creature and the control systems, his recording device capturing everything from multiple angles. If they could get the Shadow Maw to demonstrate its intelligence even briefly, it would provide the evidence Captain Webb needed for intervention. Initiating basic pattern recognition test, Director Vance announced, activating a display screen inside the containment field. Simple geometric shapes appeared in sequence, clearly designed to test rudimentary intelligence rather than the sophisticated cognitive abilities Sarah knew the creature possessed. The Shadow Maw responded to the test with the mechanical precision the neural interface demanded, but Sarah could see frustration in the tiny movements of its ears and tail. The creature wanted to show its real capabilities, but the technological leash prevented any response that wasn't pre-programmed. "Interesting," Sarah said, stepping closer to the control interface. "The responses seem almost too uniform. Is there any way to reduce the neural inhibition temporarily? I'd like to see how much natural intelligence remains beneath the conditioning." Director Vance hesitated. That could be dangerous. Without full neural suppression, the creature might attempt to communicate or demonstrate problem-solving abilities that could complicate future conditioning. "Just for a few minutes," Sarah pressed, "and with full containment field protection, of course. It would be valuable to know how much cognitive function we're working with." After a moment of consideration, Director Vance nodded. "Very well, but only minimal reduction. We can't risk undoing months of conditioning work." He made adjustments to the neural interface controls, and Sarah watched the readings change on the monitoring displays. The moment the inhibition levels dropped even slightly, the change in the Shadow Maw was dramatic. Its eyes brightened, its posture straightened, and it looked directly at Sarah with unmistakable recognition and intelligence. Then it did something that made Director Vance step back in alarm. The creature spoke, not in its native language, but in halting, carefully pronounced, standard galactic. "Help me, please." The words were barely whispers, distorted by vocal cords not designed for humanoid speech, but they were unmistakably communication from a sapient being. Dr. Ross's recording device captured every syllable. "Impossible," Director Vance breathed, immediately moving to increase the neural suppression. The interface should prevent speech entirely. But before he could complete the adjustment, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed and automated announcements echoed through the corridors. "All personnel to emergency stations. Galactic Defense Force vessels detected approaching the station." Captain Webb had received their transmission and was moving in for the rescue. Director Vance spun around to face them, his expression shifting from confusion to deadly suspicion. "What have you done?" Sarah stepped back from the control interface, her hand moving to the emergency beacon Agent Torres had given her. "We've done what we came here to do. We've documented your torture of a sapient being, and we've transmitted that evidence to the proper authorities." "You're corporate spies," Director Vance snarled, "reaching for what was probably a weapon." "No," Sarah replied firmly. "We're people who believe intelligent beings deserve freedom and dignity, regardless of what species they belong to." The station shook as the first GDF ships came within weapons range. Through the corridor windows, Sarah could see the sleek forms of military vessels surrounding Research Station Omega-7. Director Vance activated his communicator, shouting orders to station security, but it was too late. The evidence had been transmitted, the cavalry was here, and the Shadow Maw's ordeal was finally coming to an end. Inside its containment field, the creature was fighting against the neural interface with renewed strength. Every time the system tried to suppress its consciousness, the Shadow Maw pushed back, holding on to the hope that had sustained it through months of torture. "Help is coming," Sarah told it, pressing her hand against the containment field. "Just hold on a little longer." The creature looked at her with eyes that were once again bright with intelligence and gratitude. It placed its massive paw against the barrier, separated from her hand by only the energy field that had been its prison. "Thank you," it whispered in its broken standard galactic. Sarah smiled through her tears. "You're welcome, and you're going to be free." As GDF soldiers breached the station's defenses and began securing the facility, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. The evidence they had gathered would change how the galaxy viewed Shadow Maws and probably dozens of other species currently considered non-sapient. T.